It's Later with Bo Kelly. We're live on YouTube, live on Instagram, live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. It stings, doesn't it? It stings. You probably thought that you were not going to have to deal with or wrestle with the possibility of Eric and Lyle Menendez possibly going free. You didn't think that you would have to mentally or intellectually grapple with that possibility. But me, I always knew it was a possibility because I'm a little bit more cynical than most, especially when it comes to the justice system, or as many would call it, the injustice system. But now everybody's going to have to wrestle with that possibility. I would say distinct possibility. A judge just hours ago resentenced Eric and Lyle Menendez to 50 years to life for the 1989 shotgun murders of their parents in Beverly Hills. Since they've been resentenced, now they are eligible for parole. Imagine that. They were originally sentenced, I think it was back in 1989, to life without the possibility of parole, because that's how heinous a crime I think all of us thought it was. And then something happened between then and now. One documentary, two documentaries, maybe a Kim Kardashian thrown in there. And all of a sudden, and I do mean all of a sudden because this was over the course of 33 plus years before anyone really had anything to say about resentencing Lyle and Eric Menendez. All of a sudden, now they're on the precipice of a hearing in which they could be granted parole. I am not in any way surprised. I can tell you about dozens and dozens and decades of disappointments when it comes to the criminal justice system. Maybe you're not as familiar with it as I am, but it's a very familiar feeling for me. So I'm not in any way surprised. What I am surprised is how social media and traditional media have woven themselves together to create this narrative that Eric and Lyle Menendez needed a full review of their case and their sentence to possibly give them a second chance. And here's the thing which really bothers me, because in 1989, it was very clear that these two individuals should never get another chance at life as a free person. Why? Because it was agreed upon by judge, jury, and subsequent sentence that they were a menace to society, they were too dangerous, and also they had committed crimes against humanity, that there was no rehabilitation for them. That's what life without parole is. It's not about whether you get an A on your college courses, just like which was said at today's hearing. I don't know if it was Lyle or Eric, but one of them got straight A's in their most recent college semester. What the hell does that have to do with anything? How is that a mitigating factor? But it was used as such, and you know what? It was even successful. So here we are. Even though they shotgunned mommy in the face, I think twice, they killed dad, and nonetheless, people are actually considering the totality of their criminal stay in prison, whether they've been rehabilitated. And here's the thing about restorative justice. That's what they're calling it. Restorative justice. Some things you don't get a second chance at. Some things it's not about whether you are a better person now than then. Some crimes you can commit where you have forfeited the right to live among free people. And that's what life without parole is. In other words, we don't care if you become a Christian later on. We don't care if you become a better person. We don't care if you write children's books. And I say that for a reason, because there are a number of examples of people who are on death row who started writing children's books. And in the next segment, I'll talk to you about my conversation with the late Stanley Tookie Williams right before he was executed. I want to make some comparisons. There are some crimes that you can do where you forfeit any opportunity to be looked at for parole, that you should be given a second chance to see if you've been rehabilitated. Because if and when these guys are paroled, and I think that they will be paroled because everything is trending in that direction. If and when they are paroled, it has sent a message, or it will then have sent a message to society that they deserve a second chance to do the exact same damn thing that they've already done. Because as a free person, with the exception of parole and probation, you have all the freedoms of you and me and Mark and Stephan, Carnisha and Daniel. You're saying that Eric and Lyle, at some point in the future, and it could be very soon, would have the opportunity and the autonomy to live out their lives, and possibly, they don't have mom and dad around anymore because they've already murdered them, but they could commit a similar crime because they've tricked you. They fooled you into believing that they are now better individuals than before. And what about this? Let's say they are. Should it even matter? Let's say, for example, hypothetically, let's just say that Dylan Roof, the guy who walked into Mother Emanuel AME in South Carolina and just murdered everybody. Let's say in 30, 35 years, Dylan Roof is just a better person. He's taken some classes. He's written some children's books. He's turned over a new leaf. He's led the prison ministry. He is an altogether fundamentally better person today than he was yesterday. Should it even matter? No. There are some things that you can do. You forfeit your right and privilege to exist among us. Free society. You don't get second chances. After you blow away your parents, and it wasn't in self-defense, it wasn't in the heat of the moment, you had to go reload and shoot your mom in the face. There's certain things that you can do, inclusive of that, which says to me, you forfeit the right for a later hearing, regardless of whatever your lawyers might try to do, because you were in prison for life without the possibility of parole. It wasn't life with the possibility of parole if you get 2 documentaries, trying to sway public opinion. It was life without parole, period, end of sentence, end of discussion. And you could make your appeals throughout the court system, but public sentiment shouldn't have had anything to do with it. It wasn't like the governor somehow commuted their sentence, which could have been done. It wasn't like clemency was granted. The crimes hadn't changed. The evidence, most important, the evidence had not changed. Now, they allege that there was a new note or there was some extenuating circumstance that they might have been molested. Well, that was introduced in an original trial. They tried that. How do I know? Because I was old enough to remember and watched it on TV. Yes, I'm a little bit older than some people listening right now. But if you're old enough to remember it like me, you know that the whole case was predicated. The defense was that they were molested and they had no choice but to kill their parents. And that was summarily rejected by the jury and by the judge, hence the sentencing of life without the possibility of parole. And here we are, and these motherfathers might be walking around next to you and me in the near future. There's something fundamentally wrong with the American justice system. But maybe you're only somehow, let's say, new to this party, and you don't know what it's like to be disappointed in America's justice system. It's old hat for me. It may be new to you, but it's not new to America. I'll have more in just a moment. It's Later with Mo Kelly. We're live everywhere on YouTube. We're live on Instagram. We're live on the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. We're live on YouTube. We're live on the iHeartRadio app. We're live on Instagram. And I had a few more thoughts on the Menendez brothers resentencing. And I noticed some folks in the YouTube chat were saying they were actually, I'm paraphrasing, but they were supportive of the Menendez brothers, arguing, and I think really wrong, but arguing that 35 years was long enough, or that life in prison without parole was cruel and unusual punishment. No, there's specific definitions for cruel and unusual, number one. And number two, it's not about long enough. They were originally sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In other words, There were not to be any more chances. There was not supposed to be a review of their stay in prison, whether they were better people. They had, in the eyes of the court, forfeited any opportunity, with the exception of procedural impropriety of having their sentence reduced. It wasn't like they want to come up before the parole board and have their sentence mitigated. There was a lot of chicanery in my mind, which was going on with this to even get to this point. But I mentioned in the last segment someone by the name of Stanley Tookie Williams, who was executed by lethal injection back in 2005. He was credited as being one of the co-founders of the Crips. Long story short, he was found guilty in the murder of 4 people in 1981. To put it in time perspective, someone who was sentenced to death was executed in 24 years. Oh, I forgot about this. As a matter of fact, John and Ken show back in 2005, leading up to his execution, had a Stanley Tookie Williams Must Die show leading up to it, covering whether he would get clemency or not from then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. I say that to say the justice system is set up to carry out sentences that have been handed down. But in this particular instance, you have people like in the chat who are saying 35 years is long enough for no discernible reason other than they just want them out of jail. I don't exactly understand how the Menendez brothers became sympathetic to some. For me, it's, with the exception of murder, is laugh out loud funny. It's ridiculous to me. There's not an argument that you can make in support of them. Because if you make an argument in support of them, as far as life without parole being cruel and unusual, well, I have a list of another 50 people that I could rattle off with similar crimes who should have the same type of leniency. Mark, you want to jump in?
Well, I looked it up, and there's more than 56,000 people in the United States serving life without parole.
Thank you.
I wonder how many of them got a deal like this.
Thank you. Probably none. Let's say 3, okay? Lyle, Eric, and someone we don't know.
Yeah.
There's a societal permissiveness that I've made reference to over the years since I've been doing this show and other shows here on KFI. And it also extends in many ways to the criminal justice system. We know that they've outlawed, I should say they've suppressed. It's not, they haven't changed the law, but they're not executing anyone else here in California. And I have a very, very mixed emotion about the death penalty, when it should be used, how it should be used, the number of appeals you should have, and whether it works as a deterrent.
It doesn't.
Whether it's fairly applied in many instances.
There have been a lot of studies on this, and what we know from the studies is that it's super, super expensive, far more expensive than incarcerating somebody for life. It does not act as a deterrent. And also, it's just barbaric, and most other civilized rich nations do not do it.
But in the absence of that, Mark Ronner.
Yes, Mo.
I am fine with someone having life without the possibility of parole.
Well, I wonder how you make the personal calculation of how many years smoking somebody is worth when so many other people are just thrown in the hole for life. I mean, do you have to get a Netflix series for people to change their mind about you? What's the variable?
It seems that way because for some reason, for some unexplained reason, the Menendez brothers have been seen as somehow sympathetic or unjustly treated. And so that's how we got to this resentencing hearing.
I mean, we know that people can kind of fetishize criminals. We know that, say, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, got proposals.
Charles Manson.
In the mail. Yeah.
Yes.
Manson, Ted Bundy, they had female fans while they were in the joint, but that may not have justified them getting out of the joint.
No, and the problem I have here, one of the many problems is I don't see this as being on the merits. I see it as a matter of BS because the fundamental facts of the case, we're not talking about the proverbial exonerating piece of evidence coming into play, and then there's a miscarriage of justice. Like someone came forward and said, no, it's not Lyle and Eric. It was me. I was the one who shot their parents, and they took the fall for me.
Yeah, there's no Deus ex scapegoat coming along here.
Yeah, there's no exonerating DNA. There was not a question of whether they did it. They've never shown any contrition. They even falsified their alibi because their intent was to get away with the crime. There was nothing that has been changed to suggest that they have been rehabilitated, number one, and two, have been deserving of this sentencing hearing. Now, the judge decided what the judge decided, and it obviously carries far more weight than anything I have to say or anything that anyone else has to say. But I will say this. There's going to be a price for this type of jurisprudence or lack of jurisprudence. And don't think that it's lost on me that Lyle and Eric can get this type of treatment. And there are a lot of other people that I can think of that I know who did not. I said, not that I could Google. I'm saying that I know personally. And I'm speaking for Twala. He knows different people than I do. But when you go to jail for life in prison without the possibility of parole, you've done some stuff. You've really done some stuff. Some horrendous stuff. And if I didn't have to worry about the FCC or my job, I'd use some much more colorful language in there.
Oh, nobody's listening. Cut loose.
Okay. You've done some serious
Okay, wait a minute. Hang on.
But to be completely serious, Stanley Tookie Williams would have never gotten this deal. That's point number one. Point number two, Eric and Lyle Menendez have never in any way demonstrated, not to the court and definitely not to the public, that they were worthy of this type of consideration. And number three, unless you are willing to change the law for there to be consideration of everyone who has life without the possibility of parole, that maybe after 35 years, it can be reassessed and maybe they'll get a resentencing hearing. If someone could just somehow produce a Netflix documentary or two, or have Kim Kardashian come out and say some nice words and try to convolute the issue and get it in people's minds that maybe they've been mistreated. Maybe there's been some sort of miscarriage of justice because you're just not freaking old enough to remember the actual case and the specifics of what did happen and how it happened and the facts that were incontrovertible and they were inarguable about how they shot their mother in the face while she was crawling and begging for her life. And then they went out and, went to a movie, had some pizza or something, and lied about what they were going to do so they could just trick the court. It's all in the case. It's all in the public record. I don't care if Lyle and Eric have been nice guys in prison and stayed out of trouble. They can't undo anything that they've done. They can't do anything in prison to mitigate what they've already done outside of prison. And now we're going to turn around and basically say, you know what, if they can impress the parole board just one more time, in one more hearing, they might be able to come up here and do an interview with me. Sorry, but there's something wrong for it to have gotten to this point. There has long been a problem with the American injustice system. But unfortunately, and I know this is true, the people who are most upset outside of me probably can only think of this and maybe one other time in which they thought that justice was not done. That was probably OJ, and that's about it. Because you're not paying attention. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640, we're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. Now we're going to turn the corner and talk about what it takes to live in Orange County. Do you make enough money to own a home? You probably don't. We'll tell you why in just a moment.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. We're still live on YouTube, the iHeartRadio app, and on Instagram. Can you imagine how much money, unless you already live in Orange County and you've already purchased a house, but can you imagine the annual income required to purchase a typical Orange County house? And it doesn't delineate single family home versus maybe a condominium. But if you want to live in Orange County, you're going to need about $373,000 income. And that's up a lot from just 2019. Can you imagine that? Let me just tell you, I'm not living in Orange County, even if I could afford it. No, sirree. Now, that's only maybe 17% of California households having the means to possibly live in Orange County. And it has gone up a lot since the pandemic. Now, obvious reasons, the pandemic, no one was actually trying to buy property for the most part in the pandemic. We were dealing with other things far more important. And also, the interest rate back during the pandemic and preceding the pandemic was a little more than half what it is now. I think now it's like maybe some 6.9%, and back then it was 3.89% in 2019. California's median selling price also increased by 40% since 2019. So in other words, let's say you were about ready to buy a house in just California in 2019. Then, oh my gosh, the pandemic hit, interest rates shot up. 5 years later, the median house selling price went up 40% to $846,830. But, you know, California is just so horrible. No one wants to live here.
How can you charge so much for such a S-hole of a state?
Well, you know, supply, demand. People demand the S-hole. People want the S-hole. In fact, they're willing to pay more than the other smaller S-holes around the country. 40% more in just 5 years. We're being serious. I mean, we're being silly, but also serious. There is something valuable about land, regardless of whether you dislike what is going on in and around the land. Land is finite. You know, beachfront property is even more finite. And then you throw in the weather, and in California, it's difficult to duplicate just about anywhere else. Yeah, there's beachfront property in Texas. It's not like California. This beachfront property in Florida, not like California. It doesn't have quite the weather of California. Florida, they deal with hurricanes. They deal with humidity. It's not quite the same. And I say it all the time. California has its warts, but still it's the place to be if you can afford it. If you can afford it. Look, and this is where, again, I hate agreeing with Mark Runner. I hate it.
Just accept it.
I hate it with a passion.
What are we accepting?
The dark side.
No.
Let it flow into you.
Because this segues into unfettered capitalism, where we bemoan people wanting to raise the minimum wage. And there's a way I think you should do it and a way I think you shouldn't do it. But you can't continue to exist in California when you don't have rent control. For example, when you have housing prices going up 40% in 5 years, how is anyone supposed to keep up? And then you have to talk about the actual correlation and arguably causation between the cost of living and homelessness.
Well, let's not let anybody gaslight us. It's not anti-capitalist to say, hey, maybe it's not cool to squeeze people until they can't afford to exist.
I don't know, Mark.
No, it is kind of cool, actually.
You think so?
Yeah. That's been the American way.
At the same time, more people are living in their cars, and we've got more and more legislation to make people who don't have homes disappear. I don't know. It seems like something's got to give, right?
No, we want it always. Usually I would say you can't have it both ways, but we want it always. We want to be able to say, I am pro-capitalism. I want unfettered capitalism, market freedom. You know, let the markets decide, which includes the housing market, and then they complain about the cost of living, or they complain about the homelessness. Oh, there's a connection, y'all. There really is. There honestly is. For as much as we complain about the homelessness, the cost of living is connected to homelessness. And the fact that we complain about how expensive it is to live here, hello, you had the opportunity to vote, not to vote down rent control. All of it is connected. Yeah. Absolutely all of it.
It's not just a bunch of lazy junkies. It's people who were squeezed and realized, oh God, I can't afford my rent anymore.
And the very same people, maybe you, maybe not you, but probably is you, complain about the cost of groceries, complain about the cost of gas. You do know that gas stations can set their own prices, right? You do know that they've been accused of price gouging. You do know that grocery stores have been accused verifiably accused of price gouging, right?
You got it all wrong.
Mark, I thought I remember hearing that and reading that and seeing that.
Maybe you were thinking of the egg manufacturers.
Well, that's the part of the grocery prices.
Oh,
of
yes,
course.
That's right.
Yes, they were gouging gouging because of pricing decisions that they made on their own, separate and distinct from the market-related issues, supply issues, bird flu issues, over and above that. And how is it, and this is a rhetorical question because it's mathematically impossible, how is it you could have record inflation and also record profits and it not be price gouging? Hear me again. Mm-hmm. Record inflation, in other words, the cost of goods and everything's going up on its own because of market forces. Then you have record profits, in other words, the revenue minus your expenses. How is it you can have record profits if they're only raising the prices to keep up with inflation? That's rhetorical, because they're not. All these things, it's not like I took 6 years of economics in college. I only took 2 years. But my point is, certain things are just basic. It's just basic. And the point of the story, we talk about how expensive it is to live in California or Orange County because the cost of a house is 40% more in 2025 as opposed to 2019. All these things are connected. Every single piece of it is connected.
Well, when you look at the fact that even new properties that are being built, and I know that a lot of properties being built in California have taken advantage of affordable housing and all of those tax breaks to give you like 1 or 2 units that may be affordable.
Wait. I need you to slow down there because I don't think everyone knows what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. You'll have a developer, won't call any names, but you'll have a developer and they get tax credits to build an apartment building or condominium. And they have maybe 57 units, but it's provided they have at least 15, which are quote unquote Section 8 or low income.
I don't even think it's 15. I think it's maybe closer to 5 in that equation.
Okay.
Because they don't have to have that much. And I know there's supposed to be a whole lot happening to change that or to even make sure that they are abiding by that, because they can say that. And if they just put one person in, they can say, well, I'm fulfilling the quota.
That's right.
And they're getting away with building out these properties. If we really cared about the populace here in Southern California, if we cared about homelessness, we wouldn't allow every property being built where the entry point to owning a home being over $300,000 just to get in the door. That's a problem.
It makes it almost impossible for anyone to be a first-time buyer. I remember, and before I had bought my first property, I went to this program called NACA, NACA. And it was a good way to get into a first-time buyer program. That was when you could put down like maybe 3%.
Yep.
Now, post Great Recession and collapse of the housing market, there's no way you're going to get into anything for the most part unless you have 20% to put down for a conventional loan. There are different programs, but it's, it was cleaned up after the Great Recession.
Look, trust and believe, you're talking to a failed wannabe Robert Kiyosaki, a.k.a. wannabe Donald Trump, because I thought I was going to rule the world with property. And during that boom, when you could get a home for damn near zero down, just good credit. And
no verification.
It was just, hey, your credit is great. A1 credit. Here is a home loan. Congratulations. Here are the keys to your new home. And I had a bunch of them. Yes. Rental properties. This is what we were doing back then. And when that market went belly up, of course, I was in that bankruptcy department, and the room was filled with people. The issue is that those loans on the surface, they were giving individuals like myself the opportunity to get into a home at a low cost. Everyone was buying homes. The market was up. We've moved away from that. And now, interestingly enough, we have this new campaign. It is about getting out of California while houses are going up. I'm not a conspiracist.
Yes, you are. Just go ahead and say
by nature.
You are.
But I see the conspiracy when it is plain and simple in our faces. I believe that the anti-California movement is happening at the exact same time that these prices are going up. They're making it impossible for individuals you don't want to live next door to you to even be out here. And now all of a sudden we have a new law from Governor Batman that says Make it illegal for people to camp and be homeless, lock them up. I don't know. To me, it's all causal.
So if I were to tell you that Hollywood Park is getting ready to develop a movie studio and production facility on the same street as they have the Intuit Dome and also SoFi Stadium, and Inglewood has already been largely guilty of gentrification of that neighborhood because they wanted to move those people out so they could bring in big businesses and big developments like this, there wouldn't be any correlation, would there?
That's the correlation and causality that I'm referring to, good sir.
Oh, it's later with Mo Kelly, KFI AM 640 live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. That's next. Hollywood Park, movie studio, production facility.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Ooh, Later with Mo Kelly on KFI AM 640.
There are two sides to the gentrification issue. Two sides. Now, you can say someone like Mayor James Butts of Inglewood, you can say if you still happen to live in Inglewood, well, he has raised the overall economic profile of Inglewood. He has brought a lot of money into the city. I don't think anyone can argue with that. Being able to bring the Rams and the Chargers to Inglewood, to have SoFi Stadium built, the Intuit Dome for the Clippers built, same street. The YouTube Theater, the Kia Forum, all are active, having events every single week. The influx of money for the city of Inglewood cannot be argued. The other side is, to get to that point, there are a lot of people who lived in Inglewood who no longer live in Inglewood because they are maybe renting and those buildings were bought. Or they were forced out. What I mean by forced out, I know of people personally who had their rents double overnight. Overnight. Not at the end of their lease 6 months later or a year later. Overnight. You're paying $1,400 on Tuesday, and then you get a notice that each subsequent payment will be $2,800. Well, obviously, if you're living in a $1,400, you probably can't afford the $2,800, which means that you are basically being forced out. When you get forced out, they may tear down the building, or they'll have someone else come in who's paying more money. But that, too, is raising the economic profile of Inglewood. This is not abstract. This is real. This is tangible. This is actual. And in addition, Stan Kroenke, who owns the Rams, who owns SoFi, he is going to add to what he is putting in Inglewood. And you know what that means? More people are going to be moved out. Hollywood Park, which is on Century Boulevard, where you have SoFi and where you have Intuit Dome, it's going to get even more crowded because they're going to develop a movie studio and production facility. Stan Kroenke says that he's going to develop a quote-unquote state-of-the-art movie studio and production facility, which will be called Hollywood Park Studios, close quote. According to this, in the complex's first phase, it will take over 12 acres with 5 sound stages, each 18,000 square feet, 2 of which open to a single 36,000 square foot stage. It will also have a 3-story, 80,000 square foot office building to support stage production and post-production activities. I don't think they're going to put this in the parking lot of SoFi Stadium. So where do you think it's going to go? Right? More and more people are going to be moved out. And it's also going to serve as a host site for the International Broadcast Center for the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which are, of course, happening in Los Angeles. The facility will offer broadcast outlet offices, studios, control rooms, and other services in order to cover the events. So let me go back to what I was saying at the beginning. There are two sides to the gentrification question. There is what it does in a positive sense for the community if you should still be able to live in the community. If you were to buy just as the neighborhood was changing, then you have come up, as they say. You have developed equity. You have increased your economic profile as the city of Inglewood has increased its economic profile. But if you were living in Inglewood, let's say 10 years ago, and you have not grown economically, and you were maybe just renting, and the owner to your building was bought out by Stan Kroenke or any of these other business developers, and then you had no place to go. You're being forced out. And all this economic renewal, this urban renewal, which is going on in Inglewood, helps you not at all. Why? Because you don't have a place to stay. Which takes us back to our conversation last segment about homelessness. I know people who ended up homeless because of the economic renewal, which was seemingly all positive on its face, going on in Inglewood. But there are a lot of people who are living in Inglewood who didn't have a place to go, which goes back to the larger conversation of the unaffordability of California, specifically Southern California. People who ended up living in their car because they couldn't afford to go anywhere. If someone told you, remember when you were living in an apartment, maybe you still live in an apartment. If someone said you have to go at the end of the month, would you have somewhere to go? Would you be able to afford maybe some sort of a down payment on a house somewhere else? Would you be able to afford first and last month the security deposit at a new place with no real notice? That was what was happening in Inglewood. And there were thousands of people who were displaced, not necessarily all at once, but over a period of time. And so if you look at it from 30,000 feet, you say, look at the jewel Inglewood has become. You have a stadium. You have an arena. You have these other theaters. Now you're going to have a movie production facility and a broadcast center. It's going to bring even more jobs to Inglewood. But there was a price to that. And there was a human price for all of that. When we have these discussions about homelessness or the cost of living in Southern California, we need to stop lying. We need to be more honest about what it means to be homeless, how do people become homeless, and all the things that we supposedly don't like homelessness. It's because people have been, more times than not, forced out, not that just chose to be homeless. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640, we're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
If you already know what you want us to say, you're probably in the wrong place.
KFI
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.
Live everywhere.